This is a quick introduction to how to use the measurement tools on the Generation 2 Direct Measurement Video Player, or Gen 2 DMV player. The video we're going to use is of a modified Atwood's machine. It's an apparatus that we can use to study the relationship between force and acceleration. So it consists of an air glider suspended by a ribbon. When the ribbon is cut, the glider is pulled along to the left by a string, and the string is attached to some weights, and the weights are pulled by the force of gravity until they land on the table. And so let's start by looking at how we would use this system to measure the acceleration of the glider. So to measure the acceleration, we need to know two quantities: the time, the delta t, the duration of the acceleration, and the change in velocity during that time. So let's start by measuring the time interval. We'll say that the time starts right exactly when the ribbon is cut. So we can use, to start the video playing, we can either use the space bar on the keyboard or the play button on the bottom of the video. And then so we can use that to either play or pause. And then we can use either the right and left arrow keys on the keyboard to go forward and back one frame at a time, or we can use the frame forward and frame back button on the bottom of the video. So I'm going to use the arrow keys. I'm going to back up until just before the ribbon is cut. So I'm going to say that this is time 0. So let's get the stopwatch, push the stopwatch button, let's position the stopwatch someplace where we like it, and then we can use the set to 0 button to say that this is the beginning of our time interval. So now we can play the video, and we'll let the glider accelerate as the weights drop. Then I hit the space bar to stop, and I'm going to advance one frame at a time until I get, okay, now the weights are on the ground. I'm going to back up. So this is the last frame before the weights land on the table. So we can say that is delta t. That's our time interval during which this glider is accelerating. It's 142 frames, or 0.5917 seconds. So next, we need to find the change in velocity. Well, for that we'll need the initial and final velocity. The initial velocity, just when the ribbon is cut, is 0. And for the final velocity, we can assume that once the weights land on the table, that the only force acting on the glider is friction. It's very low because it's on an air track. And so we can just measure the velocity as the glider coasts along to the left here, and that we consider to be our final velocity. So to do that, we'll get a ruler. We have a ruler button down here, and it brings up a 30-centimeter ruler. We can drag it into position to any visible spot, easily measurable spot on the glider. I'm going to use the place where the string is attached, the small white knot on the left of the glider. And again, we'll set the stopwatch to 0. And so now we can either use the play button, or I'm just going to use the frame advance, the right arrow key in my keyboard, and advance one frame at a time until the same spot that we looked at initially, the little knot, arrives. Look, I went one frame too far forward. And so we have a time of about 51 frames, or 0.2125 seconds. So now to find the final velocity, we'll take that 30 centimeters, or 0.3 meters, divide it by this time, 0.2125 seconds. That'll give us the final velocity, which is also our change in velocity. And now we have our two quantities that we need to measure the acceleration.